The evening air bit hard as Mike Tyson stepped out of his sleek black SUV, his boots crunching against the gravel of East Side Detroit, a place he hadn't seen in years. He'd come back for a youth boxing event, but the weight of the past clung to him like sweat after a brutal fight. The streets were darker now, rougher. Graffiti scarred the walls, and the neon flicker of a busted streetlight cast eerie shadows. As he wandered past a crumbling bus stop, his eyes snagged on a figure hunched on a splintered bench. A man, shrouded in a threadbare jacket, sat motionless, clutching himself against the biting cold, his face half hidden under a hood. Something about him gnawed at Mike, an itch he couldn't shake. He edged closer, heart pounding like it did before a knockout punch. Squinting through the dim glow, the truth slammed into him. It was Jamal, his childhood brother in arms. The same Jamal he'd scrapped with in backyards, trading jabs and dreams under the rusty streetlights of this very hood. Mike froze, breath catching in his throat. Those sunken eyes, that hollow stare, it was him, but barely. The kid who'd once danced circles around him in sparring was now a ghost, shattered by life's relentless uppercuts. How the hell had this happened? Mike's fists clenched, a storm of shock and fury brewing inside. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a gut punch from fate, and he wasn't walking away. The streets of East Side Detroit hummed with a restless energy as Mike Tyson lingered under the flickering streetlight, his mind racing after spotting Jamal. This wasn't the same neighborhood they'd ruled as kids, back when they'd dodge broken bottles and sprint through vacant lots, dreaming of glory in the ring. Time had clawed its way through this place, leaving scars of decay. Boarded-up storefronts where old barbershops once thrived, fresh gang tags bleeding across faded brick, and the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night. Yet, beneath the grit, a pulse of memory throbbed, unbreakable, raw, alive. Mike could still hear the echo of their laughter, the smack of gloves against makeshift pads, the way Jamal's voice would boom with unshakable confidence, daring the world to take him down. That Jamal had been a force, a kid who'd duck and weave like a phantom, his eyes blazing with a hunger Mike envied even then. They'd sworn they'd rise together, two scrappy punks against the odds. But now? Mike's gaze drifted back to the bench where Jamal sat, a shadow of that fire. The contrast hit like a sucker punch. The streets had changed, sure, but Jamal? He was unrecognizable, his broad shoulders slumped, his once sharp jawline swallowed by a scruffy beard, his hands trembling as they clutched a frayed jacket. The guy who'd once danced through life with a swagger that could silence a crowd now looked like he'd been KO'd by fate itself. Mike's chest tightened, a storm of disbelief and rage churning inside. How had the years turned his brother into this? What kind of cruel twist had stripped Jamal of everything? His spark, his fight, his soul? The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions, and Mike's boots scuffed the pavement as he took a step closer, the crunch of gravel sounding like a countdown to something explosive. Memories flooded back, sharp and jagged. Jamal had been the one to push him, harder, faster, tougher, through every sparring session, every late-night hustle. They'd mapped out their futures under the dim glow of a corner store's neon sign. Mike chasing titles, Jamal dominating the amateur circuit. Back then, this neighborhood had been their kingdom, a gritty proving ground where dreams felt close enough to touch. But now, East Side Detroit stared back at Mike like a predator, its teeth bared in the form of cracked sidewalks and hollowed-out lives. Jamal's fall wasn't just personal. It was a warning, a haunting echo of what could have been Mike's story too. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, his fists balling tighter. This wasn't just about nostalgia anymore. This was a collision of past and present, a ticking bomb of emotion ready to detonate. Mike's eyes locked on Jamal, who still hadn't looked up, lost in his own abyss. The silence between them crackled with tension, the kind that could spark a fire or shatter what little was left. What had broken him? What had turned the unbreakable Jamal into this shell? Mike didn't know yet, but he damn sure wasn't walking away until he found out. And neither should you, because this story's just heating up. Want to know how deep this rabbit hole goes? Drop a 1 in the comments and subscribe for the next round. We're peeling back the layers and trust me, it's going to hit hard. Not feeling it? Smash that like button anyway and tell me why. Curious about Jamal's next move? Stick around, because the truth's about to come out swinging. The wind whipped through East Side Detroit, carrying the faint sting of diesel and despair as Mike Tyson stood frozen, staring at Jamal hunched on that splintered bench. The flickering streetlight buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows that danced across Jamal's hollowed face. Mike's heart thudded like a war drum, each beat a hammer blow of disbelief. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a crime scene. Life's brutal evidence sprawled out before him. He took a cautious step forward, gravel crunching under his boots, and crouched low, close enough to smell the damp rot clinging to Jamal's tattered jacket. "Jamal," he said, voice rough but soft, testing the waters. Jamal flinched, a twitch of recognition sparking in his bloodshot eyes before they darted away, heavy with shame. He pulled his hood tighter, as if he could vanish into it, but Mike wasn't letting him slip that easy. "Man, talk to me," Mike pressed, his tone sharpening with urgency. Jamal's lips parted, a shaky breath escaping before words stumbled out. "It started with the knee," he muttered, voice gravelly, like it had been dragged through years of regret. "Tore my ACL sophomore year. Full ride to college, gone in a snap." Mike's jaw clenched. He knew the game's cruelty, but hearing it from Jamal cut deeper. "Doc said I'd bounce back," Jamal continued, staring at the cracked pavement like it held his lost dreams. "But I never did. Lost my spot, my scholarship, everything. Came back here, thought I'd rebuild." His voice cracked, and he rubbed his face with a trembling hand, the weight of the past piling on. "Then Mom got sick. Cancer, man. Bills stacked up faster than I could breathe. 2 jobs, 3, didn't matter. She needed meds, treatment, and He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I sold everything. Our house, my gear, my pride. She still didn't make it." The words landed like a body blow, knocking the air from Mike's chest. He could see it now. Jamal, the kid who'd once dodged punches with a grin, crushed under a life that didn't fight fair. "After she passed," Jamal rasped, "I broke. Jobs dried up, rent went unpaid. Streets took me in, and I stopped caring." His voice faded to a whisper, a confession torn from a man who'd lost his soul to the grind. Mike's fists balled tight, rage simmering, not at Jamal, but at the relentless machine that had chewed him up and spit him out. The East Side they'd known, the one that had forged them in fire, had turned on its own, leaving Jamal a casualty in its shadow. For a moment, silence roared louder than the city's chaos. Jamal's head dropped, defeated, waiting for judgment that never came. Mike's mind raced, images of their past clashing with this broken present. The kid who'd had his back through every brawl, every hustle, was drowning, and Mike felt the undertow pulling at him too. This wasn't just Jamal's story. It was a mirror, a warning, a call to war. He straightened up, resolve hardening like steel. Whatever had happened, whatever had shattered Jamal, Mike wasn't letting it end here. Not like this. The East Side Detroit night clawed at the edges of Mike Tyson's resolve, the cold seeping through his jacket as he stood over Jamal, who remained slumped on that rotting bench like a man already buried. The streetlight sputtered above, casting a harsh glare on Jamal's gaunt face, eyes sunken, skin ashen, a living testament to a life beaten down by relentless blows. Mike's blood boiled, not with anger at Jamal, but at the cruel hand that had dealt this fate. The story still echoed in his skull. A shredded knee ending a college dream, a mother lost to cancer, a spiral into nothing. This wasn't just tragedy. It was a war Jamal had fought alone, and Mike felt the shrapnel lodged in his own chest. He wasn't about to let his brother-in-arms bleed out on these streets. "Get up, Jamal," Mike growled, his voice a mix of grit and desperation, slicing through the howling wind. Jamal's head snapped up, eyes flashing with a flicker of defiance drowned in despair, his breath ragged like he'd just taken a hit to the ribs. "We're not doing this here." Mike jerked his chin toward a diner across the street, its flickering open sign a faint lifeline in the urban abyss. Jamal's shoulders tensed, his cracked lips parting as if to argue, but the shame in his stare held him captive. Mike stepped closer, towering over him, his presence a force that dared Jamal to retreat further. "Move, man, now!" It wasn't a request. It was a lifeline thrown into the chaos. With a shuddering breath, Jamal gripped the bench's edge, hauling himself up like every muscle screamed in protest, his frame swaying as they crossed the street, shadows stretching behind them like ghosts on the hunt. The diner's door creaked open, unleashing a wave of stale air, grease, coffee, and the faint hum of a jukebox spinning an old blues riff. Mike slid into a booth, its torn leather groaning under his weight, while Jamal collapsed opposite him, his hood still up, eyes darting like he didn't belong in the light. A waitress ambled over, her gaze lingering on Jamal's tattered form, but Mike cut her off sharp. "2 burgers, 2 coffees, make it quick." She nodded and vanished, leaving them in a silence that crackled with unspoken stakes. Mike leaned in, his voice dropping low, steady, a lifeline piercing the haze. "I ain't here to pity you, Jamal. I've been low. Rock bottom, man. Where you think you're invincible till life proves you wrong. But you're still kicking, still here. That's more than most get." Jamal's eyes flicked up, a spark buried under layers of defeat, then fell again, his fingers twisting the frayed cuffs of his jacket. Mike's jaw tightened. He could feel the wall between them, thick with pain, but he wasn't backing off. This wasn't just a meal. It was a stand, a refusal to let Eastside claim another soul. Whatever came next, Mike was in it, fists up, ready to fight for the brother he'd never let go. The diner's dim light buzzed overhead, casting a sickly sheen across the chipped formica table where Mike Tyson sat, his eyes locked on Jamal. The air was heavy with the tang of frying oil and the weight of a friendship teetering on the edge of collapse. Jamal slouched across from him, his hood shadowing a face carved hollow by years of loss, his fingers twitching against the table like a fighter itching for a bell that never rang. Mike's burger sat untouched, steam curling up as the silence between them thickened into something suffocating. Jamal's confession, college dreams shredded by injury, a mother stolen by sickness, a life reduced to ash, hung like smoke, choking the space. Mike's pulse hammered, not just from the story, but from the realization that the East Side streets outside had nearly claimed Jamal for good. He wasn't letting that happen, not on his watch. "Listen up," Mike said, his voice a low growl that rumbled through the booth, cutting the tension like a blade. "I've got a gym downtown. My spot, my rules. Kids train there, hungry kids, ones who need someone who's been through the fire." Jamal's head jerked up, eyes narrowing, a flicker of defiance sparking through the haze of despair. "You're coming with me. You're gonna coach 'em." The words landed like a jab, sharp and unyielding. Jamal's mouth opened, a protest forming, but Mike leaned in closer, his stare a steel trap. "Don't gimme that I can't bullshit. You know the game, lived it, bled it. Those kids don't need a saint. They need a survivor." Jamal's breath hitched, his hands balling into fists, knuckles whitening against the table. "Mike, I ain't that guy no more," he rasped, voice cracking like dry pavement. "I'm broken, man. Can't even stand straight, let alone teach anybody." His gaze dropped, shame swallowing him whole, but Mike wasn't buying it. He slammed a fist on the table, rattling the coffee mugs, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the near-empty diner. "You're alive, Jamal. That's enough. I've seen you take hits that'd drop anyone. Back in the day, you'd get up swinging. That fire's still in you, buried under all this crap. I'm digging it out." The air crackled, electric with the clash of wills. Jamal's eyes met Mike's, a storm of doubt and desperation swirling in them, but beneath it, something flickered. Something alive. He exhaled hard, rubbing his face, the weight of the offer pressing down like a title fight he wasn't sure he could win. "A job?" he muttered, half to himself, testing the word like it might burn. Mike nodded, unrelenting. "A job. A shot. You're not done, Jamal. Not till I say you are." The diner's jukebox kicked on, a gritty blues riff underscoring the moment, as if the city itself was daring Jamal to step back into the ring. Mike sat back, arms crossed, waiting. This wasn't just an offer, it was a gauntlet, and the next move was Jamal's. The diner's flickering fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps, casting jagged shadows across the booth where Mike Tyson and Jamal faced off. The untouched burgers sat cold, grease congealing, as the air between them crackled with unspoken stakes. Jamal's hands trembled against the chipped table, his hood still up, shielding eyes that darted like a trapped animal's. Mike's offer, a coaching gig at his downtown gym, hung heavy, a lifeline tossed into the churning waters of Jamal's doubt. But instead of grabbing it, Jamal shrank back, his voice a ragged whisper slicing through the blues riff moaning from the jukebox. "Mike, I ain't got it no more, man. You're seeing a ghost, some version of me that's dead. What if I step in that gym and choke? Those kids'll see right through me." His words dripped with raw fear, each syllable a plea to be left in the dark where he'd buried himself. Mike's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table as Jamal's self-doubt punched holes in the air. He'd seen this before, fighters broken not by punches, but by their own minds. But this was Jamal, the guy who'd once dragged him through hellish sparring sessions, who'd laughed in the face of bigger, meaner punks. That fire couldn't be gone, not completely. "You think I don't get it?" Mike snapped, his voice rising, a thunderclap in the quiet diner. "You think I didn't sit in my car after a loss wondering if I'd ever climb back? People said I'd never make it. Called me washed up, a has-been. I had nights where the mirror showed me nothing but failure." He leaned in, eyes blazing, close enough for Jamal to feel the heat of his words. "But I didn't quit. Not because I was fearless, but because I'd be damned if I let doubt call the shots." Jamal's breath hitched, his gaze flickering up, caught in the storm of Mike's intensity. "That's you, man," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're Mike Tyson. I'm just me. What if I fail again? What if I can't?" His voice broke, hands raking through his matted hair, the weight of years crashing down. Mike slammed a palm on the table, the mugs jumping, coffee sloshing like blood in the ring. "Then you fail," he roared. The words a challenge, a dare. "You fall, you get back up, like you always did. That Jamal's still in there, man. The one who never let me slack, who'd take a hit and grin through the blood. You don't gotta be perfect. You just gotta show up." The diner fell silent, even the jukebox seeming to hold its breath as Jamal stared at Mike, emotions warring in his eyes, fear, shame, and a faint, stubborn spark. He exhaled hard, a shudder running through him, like a fighter shaking off a near knockout. "I don't know, Mike," he whispered, voice trembling but alive. Mike didn't blink. "You don't gotta know. Just say yes." The tension stretched taut, a rope ready to snap as Jamal teetered on the edge of surrender or salvation. What happens next? Will he step into the ring of life again, or let the shadows win? You tell me. Drop a hell yeah in the comments if you're rooting for Jamal to rise, and subscribe to see if he does. Think he's down for the count? Hit that like button and say why. Next part's coming, and it's gonna swing hard. Don't miss it. The dawn broke over East Side Detroit like a bruise, purple and raw, as Jamal stood outside Mike Tyson's downtown gym, the glass doors looming like the gates of a coliseum. His palms sweated, his stomach twisted into knots tighter than a boxer's wraps. He hadn't set foot in a place like this since the world had chewed him up and spat him out. The memory of Mike's words from the diner, gruff, unrelenting, a lifeline laced with fire, still burned in his skull. "Just say yes," Mike had demanded, and Jamal had, the words slipping out like a reflex, a desperate gasp from a man drowning in his own wreckage. Now, here he was, facing the unknown, the weight of his tattered jacket pulling him down as if the ghosts of his past clung to every thread. Mike stood beside him, arms crossed, his presence a silent anchor in the storm raging inside Jamal's chest. "You ready?" Mike asked, voice steady but edged with expectation. Jamal's throat tightened, his eyes darting to the doors. "I don't know, man," he rasped, the honesty scraping out like gravel. "Feels like I'm stepping into someone else's life." Mike didn't flinch. "It's yours now. Move." With a shove of encouragement, he pushed Jamal forward, and the doors swung open, unleashing a rush of sweat, rubber, and adrenaline. The scent of a battlefield Jamal had once called home. Inside, the gym pulsed with life. Young fighters jabbed at bags, their grunts echoing off concrete walls, sweat dripping like blood offerings to the grind. Heads turned, whispers rippling as Mike strode in, but his shadow didn't linger. He stepped aside, leaving Jamal exposed in the spotlight of their stares. A wiry coach in a faded hoodie approached, his handshake firm. "Name's Torres. Mike says you're the real deal." Jamal's gut lurched. Real deal? He barely recognized himself in the cracked mirror of his mind. "I used to be," he mumbled, but Torres clapped his shoulder. "These kids don't need a legend. They need a warrior who's been in the dirt." The words hit hard, and Jamal's gaze shifted to the fighters, teenagers with hungry eyes, their fists taped and their dreams raw. Something stirred in him, a flicker of the old Jamal, the one who'd once danced through punches and laughed at pain. Days bled into weeks, and the gym became his crucible. At first, he hovered on the edges, watching, his voice a whisper as he corrected a kid's stance. But the fire Mike swore was still there. It smoldered, then roared. Soon, Jamal was in the thick of it, barking orders, his tone sharp and alive. "Keep your guard up, Jamal ain't raising quitters," he'd shout, and the kids listened, their respect hardening into something tangible. He didn't just teach jabs, he taught grit, showing them how to stand when life swung low. The hollow man from the bench faded, replaced by a figure who stood tall, his scars a map of survival these kids could follow. One evening, as the gym emptied, Mike stepped in, his silhouette filling the doorway. "Look at you, man," he said, a rare grin cracking his face. Jamal wiped sweat from his brow, a tired but real smile breaking through. "Didn't think I had it in me." Mike's eyes gleamed with pride. "I did." Around them, the gym hummed with echoes of resilience. Jamal's, the kids', East Side's. He wasn't just back. He was reborn, forged anew in the heat of a fight he'd finally won. The gym's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as dusk settled over East Side Detroit, painting the concrete walls in shades of shadow and grit. Jamal stood in the center of the ring, sweat-soaked and steady, barking instructions at a wiry kid who ducked and weaved with a fire Jamal now recognized as his own. Months had passed since that night in the diner, since Mike Tyson had dragged him from the abyss of a splintered bench and thrust him back into the fight. The transformation was undeniable. His voice, once a broken whisper, now rang out with authority. His frame, once hunched in defeat, stood tall, a beacon for the young fighters circling him. The kids didn't just see a coach, they saw a man who'd clawed his way out of hell, and that truth fueled their hunger, their respect, their belief. Mike leaned against the ropes, watching with a quiet intensity, his arms crossed as Jamal corrected a jab with the precision of a man reborn. The air thrummed with the rhythm of gloves on pads, a symphony of resilience that drowned out the ghosts of East Side streets. Jamal had become more than a survivor. He was a force, a living lesson etched in every scar and every shout. But tonight felt different, heavier, as if the weight of his journey had crystallized into something unbreakable. Torres, the wiry coach, stepped up beside Mike, his eyes scanning the room. "He's not just training him," Torres muttered, voice low. "He's showing him how to live." The truth hit Mike like a body shot. Jamal's revival wasn't just about him. It was a mirror for every kid in that gym, every soul East Side had tried to crush. One chance, one stubborn bastard who wouldn't let him fade, had flipped the script. Jamal finished the session, clapping the kid on the shoulder, and turned to catch Mike's gaze. For a moment, the gym faded. The grunts, the sweat, the echoes. And it was just them. Two brothers forged in the fire of a neighborhood that didn't forgive. "You were right," Jamal said, his voice steady but thick with something raw. "I wasn't done." Mike's grin was a rare crack in his armor. Never were. As Jamal stepped out of the ring, a kid lingered, eyes wide with awe. "Coach, how'd you come back from nothing?" The question hung there, a challenge and a plea. Jamal paused, glancing at Mike, then back to the kid. "Someone wouldn't let me quit," he said, simple and true. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one shot, and you're back in the game." The kid nodded, absorbing it like gospel, and Mike felt the weight of it too. a lesson carved from blood and concrete, a testament to the power of refusal in the face of ruin. The gym's lights flickered as night deepened, but the glow of Jamal's resurgence burned brighter. Eastside hadn't won. Not this time. One chance had sparked a chain reaction, proving life could pivot on a razor's edge, from darkness to defiance, in ways no one saw coming. Jamal was proof, standing tall where he'd once fallen, a man remade by the fight he almost lost.